afternoon once again. For today, we will be having the continuation of our discussion on the measurement of national output. Yesterday, we had the discussion on, the other day, last Monday, we had a discussion about the two measures of measuring the national output or the national output. We have GDP and GNP, and then we had a quiz. So for this afternoon, we will learn about the different approaches to solving or calculating the GDP. And then tomorrow, we will discuss the growth rates, and then we will have the worksheet. And then by Friday, we will have the long test. Okay? So that will be the timeline that we will be following for this week. Hmm. I will open it this afternoon na lang langga. Okay, sige. So, just a recap of what we have discussed the other day. We discussed about GDP and GNP, and we learned that when we say GDP, ang sa ganitong GDP? What's GDP and how is it different with GNP?
The sum of the monetary value of all the final goods and services produced within a country's borders at a certain point in time.
That's for GDP. Okay, that's the definition of GDP. But how are you going to differentiate GDP with GNP? So may ilang difference.
Ang GDP check kay gawa dito sa Pilipinas, ang GNP din check kay gawa ng Pilipino check.
Yes, exactly. That is the shortcut way of remembering GDP and GNP. So for those who were not here the other day, when we say GDP, it is the sum or the total monetary value of all the goods and services produced here in our country. So regardless of who made it, regardless of who worked for it, basta kay diri sa Philippines na happened, then that is part of the GDP of the Philippines. On the other hand, when we say GNP, GNP stands for Gross National Product, then it means that this is the total monetary value of all the goods and services produced by the citizen. So if we are talking about the GNP of the Philippines, then we are referring to the output or the production of the citizen anywhere in the world. So again, GDP is the production of all the goods and services here in our country. Mapa Chinese, Japanese, kinsa man or Filipino ba na siya ang nag-make sa good or service basta kay within the country. And then GNP is the production of the goods or service made by a citizen or the Filipino anywhere in the world. May that person be here in the Philippines or in any parts of the world. So today we will understand ako i-add ana, which is GNI, and then we will analyze the process of the calculation of national output and understand the importance of the calculation of the national output. So as I've said a while ago, GDP is within a particular country, the production within a particular country. GNP is the production of the country's citizens. And then we have GNI. GNI stands for Gross National Income. Again, it's gross national income. Unsay difference ni GNI and ni GNP? By the way, for the rest of the meetings, we will talk about more sa GNI. GNI and GNP is just similar. Parehara na sila, but there's a slight difference between the two. When we say GNP manggod, it is the total output or income of the citizens, including those received by the country and those spent abroad. Meaning, let's say for example, Gab here went to the US to become a doctor and rendered his services as a doctor in the US. So if we say that it's GNP, the total earnings, for example, of Gab is about 200,000 per month in pesos. Kung na siya converted na in pesos, for example. So let's say 200,000 pesos a month. So kanang 200,000 pesos, a part of it, let's say, magpadala siya og 70,000 here in the Philippines. Again, With that, what ay 200,000 income that he has for every month nagapadala siya 70K diri sa Pilipinas. And then the rest of the money, the 130,000 will be spent for his own consumption and whatnot. So mga inana lugar. Now, for GNP, regardless if nag-spend siya dito or nagpadala siya dito sa Pilipinas, that entire income that he had in the US will be accounted sa GNP. Lahi sa GNI because for GNI, the only money or the only income that will be accounted kay katong gipadala ra niya. Pila ito yung gipadala diri sa Philippines? Pila ito yung gipadala?
Okay.
70? 70K, diba? 70K akong gingon. So, 70K. So, therefore, sa GNI, whatever ang i-ano lang, i-account lang is the income rather, that was received by the country as a remittance. Kato yung 130,000, wala na to siya ilabot sa GNI. Pero if we talk about GNP, regardless if gipadala niya diri or gispend niya dito, ang total income ni Gab will be accounted sa GNP. Nasabtan ba? So again, ang GNI katulang napadala balik diri. Pero usually for accuracy purposes na lang for whatever received by the country, the nations all over the world are usually using GNI. So ayaw mo katingala ha, GNI na usually ato ang kay mas accurate man gyud kay mo gid ang na-receive sa country. Wala man ta kabalo, di mo ta sure pila gyud ang na-spend sa isa ka, especially for those who are working abroad, sa isa ka OFW in other countries. Nasabtan ba? Am I clear sa GNI and GNP? GNP, the total income regardless if gispend or gipadala. GNI is katulang money nga gipadala here or na-receive diri sa Philippines. Am I clear? Claro? I hope you don't find it confusing. Okay, next is we proceed with the approaches to measure national output. So our national output is of course represented by GNI and GDP. So how do we get the GDP or how do we calculate the GDP of the country or the national output or the income? So there are three approaches. Now take note for the three approaches, it is said that when you use any of the three approaches, you will arrive at the same answer. So murag inana ang concept sa sa three approaches. For you to measure the GDP, bisag unsay mong gamiton, ang logic there is you will arrive at the same answer. So the first approach is the income approach. Now, for you to be able or for us to be able to calculate the GDP, we use the income of all the sectors or the major sectors in the economy. If you can still remember the circular flow of the economy, what are the three major sectors? What are the three major sectors? Kung naka-remember pa mga, kalimot mo sila
Household, firms,
Household,
and services, and
firms,
government.
and government. So we have households, firms, and government. So for income approach, this approach adds all of the income by all the three sectors as what you can see here. So you have your personal income, meaning the income of the households, the government income, which is the income of the government, and the corporate income, which is the income of the firms. Now, you don't have to overthink ha. For this part of our discussion, for the entire discussion, ayaw na kayo ninyo i-overanalyze. I know that we have been analyzing for the past quarters and mind blown kay mo grabe sa analysis. So karon ayaw na kayo ninyo huna-hunaa og ayo ang kanisya because I will not ask you to solve. What I want you to remember lang as we go along with the discussion and the approaches is for you to remember unsa ang component for every approach and what that approach is all about. Do you get me? Masabtan ba? More na inyo i-remember ha, unsa na siya nga approach about and then what are the components. That's the most essential thing that you have to remember lang. Ayaw na nimo pag-analyze na ha, so nganong inani, nganong inanaay na mo na siya. Okay? Okay? So have your brains a time to rest in analyzing so much. So again, Income approach, i-add tanan income, meaning total earnings, okay? Income or total earnings of the three major sectors. Claro? Claro ba? Shall we proceed? Sige, next is expenditure approach. This is the second approach. Now, the expenditure approach adds all of the expenses. What do you mean by expenses? Tanan spending, tanan na gasto sa tanan sectors of the economy. When you say spending or when you say expenditure, it refers to your expenses or the consumption of every sector. Pila man ang total na na-consume. Of course, consumption can be measured by the total amount of expenses or spending to be able to acquire that certain good. Let's say, for example, nagpalit ka og banana Q. Ang banana Q kitag 5 pesos each. Imong gipalit kay 3 ka banana Qs. So, pila man imong total nga na-spend? Pila ang total na nagasto? Sino mo kayo answer ko? I think ang mo, uy. Pero nasa kasturya din, he. Pila ang total na gasto? Nagpalit kag 3 ka banana Q. Ang isa ka banana Q kitag 5.
15.
15 pesos. So that is how expenditure approach is being measured, the total spending or total consumption of all the sectors. Okay? So what are the components of the expenditure approach? So we have 5 here. Personal consumption or personal spending. You have government consumption. We have capital formation. This is for the firms, the roads, mga infrastructures, mga buildings, sa panadira, plus the net exports. And you can get the net exports by subtracting exports. Exports meaning those we produce here in our country and then send to other countries or sold to other countries. And then minus imports or those made in other countries and bought and transferred or sent here in our country. So the difference between the two is the net exports, and lastly is the statistical discrepancy. Now, what is statistical discrepancy? Diba I told you a while ago na the three approaches that I will be mentioning right now has an assumption na parehara siyang answer tanan. Diba? Niya, anak ko nga, maski unsa pa nga approach yung gamiton, moabot ka sa point na same ra siya og answer. However, because of how vast our economy is, there is what we call statistical discrepancy, which is actually the difference of the two statistics that should be equal. Let's say dapat pareha answer si income approach o si expenditure approach. Pero it turns out dili di sila pareha. So for it to be the same or for it to be equal, there is some adjustments that should be made and mo ni siya si statistical discrepancy. So due to the differences in the calculation and the incomplete data, especially karon, it's not when we gather data for us to be able to solve the GDP, there are incomplete data sources and it will eventually lead to unequal final numbers. Like, pare, good na ka na itong kabantay mo ka ng sa inyong allowance. So, hala, ni padulong ang 10 pesos. And then after that one, you can't really pinpoint asa ni padulong imong 10 pesos. And then, just let it be. Marina na bitaw. So, same sa economy. Because of so much calculation and mga incomplete data that's being gathered, there are times na the income approach and the expenditure approach does not equal. So, mo na nga na-see statistical discrepancy for adjustments. So to put it simply, when you say statistical discrepancy, that is the difference or that is the adjustments made for this approach to be the same with the answer or in the calculation of the other approaches. Am I making sense? Nagets niyo akong point? So katong mga dili nila makitaan nga mga data para mapariha siya sa income, mo ni siya ang i-adjust si statistical discrepancy. Claro? Nasabtan? So, more na siya. Para lang mag-gets ninyo, I know na di naman ta mag-solve, pero I just want you to understand what statistical discrepancy is. So, again, the components of the expenditure approach or the expenses are the following: personal, government, capital formation, net exports, and statistical discrepancy. By the way, am I too fast? Okay, Ra? Are we good? Still listening? And lastly, we have industrial origin approach. This is the last approach. So we are done with income, expenditure. Now we move on to industrial origin. How is this approach different from those I mentioned a while ago? If we say income approach, we are adding all the income. If we say expenditure approach, we're adding all the spending or all the expenses in the economy. But for industrial origin, it adds all the production. Tanan na production of all the production sectors in our economy. So when we say production sectors, dili siya katong major sectors major sectors kay the households, firms, and the government. Kani production sectors are composed of the following. We have the agriculture, hunting, forestry, and fishing sector. We have the industry sector, and we have the service sector. These are the three categories or three sectors na gi-categorize for the overall production in our economy. So let's start with this one. So to calculate the GDP using industrial origin, we have to categorize first. Dapat kay i-add sa tanan under agriculture, hunting, forestry, and fishing. That's why you have here total production of agriculture, forestry, and then the total production sa fishing. So that's the answer. Next is another answer for the industry sector. This is composed of the mining and quarrying, manufacturing, construction, electricity, gas, and water supply. So all production that are made under the following will be accounted for in the industry sector. So katong tanan na production in any of these three, dira na siya padulong. And lastly, the service sector. By the way, when you say service sector, diba, remember during the trivia game that we had, na the biggest percentage of the GDP of our country is coming from the service sector. So what's the service sector? Basically, this is the labor of the people. So it's the labor of those under transport, storage, and communication, trade and repair, kanang mga mekaniko, vehicles, motorcycles, those under sales, di ba? Dagan makayo na, puro man na mga tao. Personal and household goods, financial intermediation, more on like sa banks, and sa mga financial institutions, kanang mga co-op, mga unsa pa na dira, mga mutual funds, real estate, kanang mga brokers, and then mga sales agents, mga business activities, mga businessmen, businesswomen, public administration, those who are in the concierge, those who usher people, nasa front desk, defense and compulsory social activities, mga policemen, mga army, and so on, and other services, mga koan. So everything is under those who are requiring labor from the people is under service sector. So mo na siya tanan. That's why it is basically the biggest contributory sector in our economy because mostly sa ato kay labor gyud. Unlike other countries wherein they depend, they also depend, aside from depending from manual labor, they also depend from mga machines. Kita din sa ato kay even if we have machines, kay nagya po yung mga tao, kabantay mo, murag, bisan og nanay mga machines kay gyapon ang mga tao, sila gyapon ang mag-repack, sila pa gyapon ang magsulod sa mga butang, diba? Sa other countries kay basically it's the machine that will do most of the things. Although not everything, pero most of the things. So muna nga kita we are dependent with the services we offer, and of course our income is dependent on this sector. So once you are done with adding every sector, then the last thing to do is to add all the sectors. Now, question, why is it that we had to categorize them first before adding all the sectors? Na pwede naman unta nga i-add ra tanan. Diba? Ano kailangan pa nga na as industry, nganong nag-service pa ta? Why do we have to categorize and, sort them out first before adding everything? Pwede naman na fishing plus manufacturing plus transport, storage, communication, plus agriculture, o diba? Plus other services. nga naman kailangan nga i-hanay pa siya, i-sort pa siya.
Different industries man ang tulot siya.
Yes, because they are coming from different industries, diba? So it would be better if, or different sectors, it would be better to sort them out so that whatever, ay, naghahatag na kong answer. Ano pa man, what else? Aside from those, that one mentioned by Miles. Ano pa may other reason? Why do we have to sort them? Aside from they are of different industries or sectors, ano naman? Any idea? Manong kailangan na atong ilahi-lahi? Nanong di nato isagol si mining and quarrying sa fishing? Anong diri sa nato siya sa agriculture and forestry? Para organize, yes, organization is key. What else? Naa pa ba? May idea? Try to think. What else? What could be the reason? Wala idea na? Wala. Wala na gid may idea nga nagilahi-lahi siya. Wala. Oh my God, grabe sila. Wala na may ma-think. Now, the thing is, in our economy, we have to sort them out, especially for the production, because aside from organization and aside from they are from different sectors or industries, it would be better to know the progress of every sector, diba? Which of the, as I've said a while ago, now we know na ang biggest bulk sa atoang or ang biggest contribution sa atong economy is service sector because we separated the sector with the other sector. Do you get my point? So the only way to know for us where we are good at, what is the biggest percentage of the contribution that each sector has in our economy is for them to be sorted. So do you get my point? And at the same time, it would be a good basis for us to know where we could improve para for initial planning and for us to be able to know the next step that we are going to do. So, mo na siya. So, my advice for you in this part is you don't have to memorize everything. Just familiarize. I think mas better if i-memorize lang ninyo ning kaning duha nga sectors, kani sila duha, kay the rest, listen kasi i-memorize sa taas kaayo. So, kani siya, as long as you know what's the components of every sector, then that would be good. Because sinana ang magawa sa LP, most likely. Like, asa siya na belong na approach, or unsa ni siya nga sector, kana siya. And what are the components of every sector, kana siya. Okay? So again, just a recap, the three approaches are the following: income approach, expenditure approach, and industrial origin approach. For income, we are measuring income. For expenditure, we are adding all the expenses in the economy. For industrial origin, we are adding all the production in all the, or in the different sectors, production sectors in our economy. So as a summary, here are the three approaches with its corresponding components. By the way, I have already uploaded the slides. So if you wanted to scroll the slides, then you are free to do that. You can download it in Silid. Nasabdan ba si approaches? So, dili na kayo siya, stress. Hindi man ninyo kayo na i-analyze, i-familiarize yourself about the three approaches. Klaro ba? Are we clear? Okay. So now let's proceed to this question. So I have two questions for you. The first question is, what is the importance or why is it important to measure the national output? Ako ni, kamo na gidang mustoryaan ni. Nga naman,
To see our progress as a country, chair, where we can improve in order for us to grow, chair.
Yes, exactly. As what I've mentioned a while ago, and as said by Miles, for us to know where we could improve and to know the state or the progress of our country. Are we doing well or are we not? Diba? We started with the topic on the question I asked you the other time. Na, do you think the Philippines is doing well or are we doing poorly? So basically, for us to be able to answer that question is for us to do this to measure the national output. So even if it's so tedious for statisticians, it's so tedious to gather information and of course to run the data, imagine na dagan kaayo production sectors all over the country and usually ang i-compute ana kay billions and trillions of pesos already. Dagan na kayo na zero zero, dagan na kayo numbers, but still the point of measuring the national output is for us to know how we are doing and at the same time it would be a great basis for national planning. Diba? The only way for us to be able to know what to do next is for us to assess ourselves about the present situation. So it's very vital for us to compute or measure the national output because it provides knowledge on the economic condition, di ba? Makabalota nga okay ang Pilipinas bisag nag-pandemic because of this thing. Kabalota nga kanang galisod ta because of measuring the national output. So basically kana it provides us knowledge and then it also enables us to understand the importance of the various sectors. So katong mga production sectors, sa ilang contribution sa atong economy, which then can be of help for analysis, structuring, and planning. Diba? Mura na gud nagkamo. How can you know if you have to improve if you don't know the current situation or the current standing sa inyong grado? Diba? So, ano ninyo pagkabalo, nga kailangan di mo mawi. Kung wala mo kabalo, pira inyo ang long test. So, kana siya, inanarapod sa economy. We can we can think of what to do next if we know what is going on at present. Claro, nasabtan? O, tanong din mo ni si LT, din tagaanin ko, vague king answer. Sige ha, bantay lang gid mo. Nag-i-explain gid ni og ayo karon. Anyway, bitaw ay. Sige, another question that I would like to ask you. This will be the last question before I dismiss you. What time will we end? Wednesday, lagi karon. Ano, naka-blue ko, galibog na noon ko. Akong kutanahon nga time kay Thursday. We'll end at 1:50. Sige. Sige, I'll give you para dali ninyo ma-understand ang question. Our GDP, di ba, when we say GDP, it's the total production tanan na produce nga goods and services in our country. And our GNI is tanan goods and services produced by the Filipino citizens. And the data for GDP and GNI is one or two of the indicators for us to know if our country is doing well. The more that our production increases, the more na naka-better ato or we experience economic growth. And through the years, since the early 2000s until 2019, our GDP and our GNI has been rising. So gasaka gid na siya. Na-halt lang siya the moment we experienced the pandemic by 2020. So moto nga 'di ba we experience a recession or nag-down din atong economy at that time. But going back, since we have been experiencing GNI or GDP rising for the past several years before the pandemic hit, do you think the reason why our GDP or GNI rose is because daghan gyud tag na-produce nga goods and services? Or is it because ni mahal lang gyud ang presyo ani nga goods and services? Just answer that one. Do you think that the GDP or the GNI increase for the past years is because of increase gid sa tong production, meaning inana gid ka productive gid ay ang Pilipinas, daghan tag na-produce, daghan tag nabuhat, or is it because ni mahal lang gyud ang goods and services? Because it's a reality, di ba? Every year gasaka magid ang presyo sa mga palaliton. So that's my question. What do you think? Just choose. Is it because na daghan tag production, an increase in the production, or is it because of the increase in the prices? You can type your answers in the public chat. No need to explain. Just give me an answer. What do you think? What do you think? Gusto niyo answer? Are we experiencing economic growth or increase in the GDP and GNI because of an increase of the production of the Philippines? Or is it because may taas ang presyo? Why? Increase in prices. Increase in production daw by Ira. Increase in prices. Can be both. Increase in price. How about the others? Samok. Sa culture, I think it's because of the increase in production, especially karon, medyo ni advance in technology, we have gained international experience. Oh, okay. Increase in production. Samok debate time. Production gyapon. Actually, the answer is it's both. Ga-increase ang atong production and at the same time, ga-increase gid ang presyo sa goods and services. So for us to know if our country is really experiencing an increase in the production or how big the increase of the production is, there are two ways to do that one. The first one is nominal GDP or GNI, or the other one is real GDP and GNI. Now, in measuring the GDP and GNI, diba, remember, to get the GDP or GNI, we use the prices of the goods. Monetary value, diba to, ang definition, remember? Diba, it's the sum of the monetary value of all the goods and services. Of course, for us to be able to measure that one, atong gamiton kay ang presyo. So, in measuring the GDP or GNI, there are two things that we have to consider. First is the current prices. Now, in measuring the GNP or the GNI, we use current prices. What do you mean by current prices? Like kung unsa ang presyo ana nga tuig. Let's say, for example, the price of a phone in 2017, an iPhone, for example, is 40,000. And then, pag-abot sa 2018, nahimo na siyang 50,000. Karon nga 2022 na nasa 75,000, 'di ba? Nitaas ang presyo gyud. So kana siya, whatever is the price of that certain year, if we use nominal GDP, then the prices that we are going to use in calculating the GDP are its current prices. Okay? More na remember, current price meaning price anang year. I will give an example later on. On the other hand, when we say real GDP, we are calculating the GDP or the GNI using fixed or constant prices. So what do you mean by fixed or constant prices? We will not use the current price. Instead, we will have a basis or a base price or a fixed price or constant price as a basis for the calculating of the succeeding years. Example, kanya siya. Ako sa i-explain ang data here. So we have here year 2017, 18, and 19. Now let's say that you are the Republic of 9H. You are a country, or Republic of 9H is a country. And Republic of 9H is only producing ballpen and pencil. Example lang ha, mura na inyo ang goods gina-produce. Ballpen and pencil. Now let's say that this is the price of the ballpen and pencil for these respective years. Like 2017, 6 ang price sa ballpen. Ang price sa pencil is 4 pesos. For that year, the total production, entire production for that year is 100 ballpens. I hope you are listening. And then the total production of the pencils for that year is 25. Then moving on to 2018, ni-increase ang price sa ballpen, which is 8. From 6, it became 8. And then si pencil ni mahal. From 4, it became 5. But the total production from 100, it became 110. And then for 25, it became 30. Next, for 2019, nisaka na po ang presyo, nahimo ng 10. Ang ballpen, nahimo ng 6. Ang pencil from 5. And the total production or total quantity produced na ballpens for that year is 112. And then the total quantity of pencil produced in that year is 32. Now, how do we know if we are using nominal GDP or current prices and constant prices, or nominal GDP or real GDP? So let's take a look. Here, 2017, if you notice, in calculating the GDP, atong gibuhat is, gi-add lang nato ang total production for that year. And for us to do that one, gamito nato ang price, which is 6 pesos. Ana nga year for the ball pen. And then 4 pesos, ana nga year for the pencil. With its corresponding total production of ball pens, which is 100. 100 man diri ang total na produce. 25 ang total nga na produce ana nga year. Just calculate and then you can get the total GDP. So GDP of Republic of 9H for 2017 is 700. For 2018, more gyapon, 8 na atong gamit. So we are using the price for that specific year. 8 ang price, 5 ang price sa pencil, and then the total production, the quantity of ball pens and the quantity of pencils. And then the GDP is 1,030 pesos for that year. Come 2019, so we have 10 pesos now, which is the price of the ball pen for that year, and 6 pesos, which is the price of the pencil for that year. And then total production, just i-times lang siya. I-times ang price of ball pen with its total quantity or total production, and as well as the pencil with a total of 2,932. Now, what have you noticed with the GDP for years 2017, 18, and 19? Ni-increase ba siya? Ni-increase ba ang GDP? Clearly, yes, di ba? It increased. Ni-taas yun ang GDP from 2017 to 2019. But what have you noticed with the increase? Dako kayog ambak, di ba? From 700, it became 1,030. All the more when it reached 2019, it became 2,932, which is more than 100% ang increase sa GDP. So let's pause with nominal GDP. Let's proceed with real GDP. Now for real GDP, we are using constant prices. What do you mean by constant prices? Instead of using the price for a specific year or for that year, we will be using constant price, which is 2017. Sure man mo 2017 atong gamiton para makabalot so that we can eliminate the factor of the increase in the price. So para constant yun siya, pila magidi ay ang total increase sa production if we take away the increase in the price. So we will use constant prices for 2017. Am I making sense? Are you still with me? Nagets ba akong point?
Yes, sir.
I
Nasabtan?
can answer.
Yes?
Ang basis sa real GDP treaty, ang price sa first year niya, ang initial niya.
Yeah, sa first na year. Pero depende man na siya. Kaya pwede man nga ang constant price kay pwede ang basis kay 2000, year 2000 pa. In this case, 2017 lang. So there is a specific year that will be used para i-calculate ang GDP starting katong first na year nga basis up to the current year. So inana si real GDP. Why is that nga ginabuhat na siya? Para ma-eliminate nato ang factor na price increase. Do you get me? So makitaan lang nato ang total production. So going back, you notice we are using 6 pesos and 4 pesos, which is the price of year what? Year 2017. We are using constant prices here. So gisolve nato ang GDP sa 2017 using 2017 na price. We also solve the GDP of the 2018 using the 2017 price and also the 2019 with the 2017 price. So we are using constant price here. And ni-increase ba ang GDP for the 3 years? Ni-increase ba?
Yes.
Increase siya, diba?
Yes.
700, 780, and 800. But what's the difference between the two? See,
Quantity produced.
ang quantity, yes, exactly. Um that is the point wherein we can see that there is really an increase in the production. However, dili man taga count. When we solve for the GDP, we don't count the quantity. We solve for the monetary value. So therefore, naagid ang presyo gid ang appeal si price sa pag-calculate sa GDP. So in this sense here, if you notice, dili tagdagko kayo ang increase sa GDP, right? While on the other hand, ang increase is from 700 to 780 to 800. Dili kay na more than 100% an increase. So inana ang point ni real GDP. We use real GDP if we want to eliminate the factor which is inflation. Makita nato if we are really doing well in terms of the production. Now, if we want to know how well we are doing for that certain year lang, it's better to use nominal GDP because we are using current prices. But if we want to compare our production or our growth for a certain year up to the current year, then we use real GDP as with the use of the constant price sa katong first year nga basis nimo in comparison to the current year. Nasabtan? Nasabtan ba? So, the point here is, clearly, the use of current prices, kaning sa nominal GDP, shows a figure that is larger, di ba? Mas dako gid siya than the real economic growth. So, as production increases, as you notice, as production increases, the same can be observed in the prices. Ni dako lagi ang production, pero ni dako man sad ang presyo sa mga goods. So, therefore, the same can be observed with the prices of the pencils and the ball pens. So this implies that the increase in nominal GDP represents not only the rise in production, diba? This is what I asked you a while ago. It doesn't only represents the increase in the production, but also it is accompanied by the increase in prices. That's why I told you it's both. But we can also have it calculated with real GDP. If the concern is to determine the level of economic well-being, meaning ato naunsa man ta atong progress through the years, it would be more appropriate to use constant prices or the real GDP pegged at a certain base year. That's why we are using a base year, which is 2017, to eliminate the effect of price changes to the total production in our economy. Nasabtan akong point? So if gusto lang ka makabalo kung kumusta ang well-being sa country in terms of the production, it's best to use constant prices. Pero if you want to know how we are doing well using current prices, then it's safe or it's appropriate to use nominal GDP. Nasabtan? Am I clear? Klaro ba? Okay, so this one. Let me show you the data that we have for the GDP ranking all over the world. So we have here the GDP in 2019. We are using nominal prices here. Anong nominal man? Why do you think that we are using? We are using. We are using the nominal prices here. Anong dili man real?
Faker.
Yes, kana raman na year, di ba? We are just looking at the GDP for 2019. But if you want to compare the GDP of 2019, 2018, 2020, 2017, 2018, 2019, then it's best to use real. Pero kung kana lang year, then it's good to use nominal prices. Nasabtan? Klaro ba? So this is the ranking in 2019. Nanay ranking sa 2020 pero wala pa sa 2021. The same lang yapon. We have here leading US. Di naman ni trillion. This is thousand, million, billion, trillion, quadrillion. Ano ba? Quadrillion ba? Sunod sa ano? Quadrillion man, no? Tama ba? Thousand, million, billion, trillion. Yeah, I think quadrillion. So in siya, we have US leading all over the world is US in terms of the production sa GDP, making the territory productive. By the way, with GDP, you are making or we are, if we have high GDP, it means that we are making a good job in making our country productive. But if it's GNI or GNP, then we are doing a great job in making our citizens productive. Okay, since we are talking about GDP sa territory, GNP sa citizens. So this is the ranking. US, rank 1, China, Japan, mo gini sila ang top 3. Germany, India, karon na year, mas nauna lang si UK kaysa kay India. And then you have France. Now question, sure, dako kayo rank 5 si India, pero nganong poor gyapon si India? Why do you think? Ano man? Para nagapon na ni, I'll show you. The ranking of the Philippines in 2019 is we are on the 33rd spot. So we have UAE 29, Norway, Israel, Ireland, Philippines. Singapore is below us. Ang last is the 205th data from Tuvalu. Country na siya nga very small. Why do you think? Ang India nasa rank 5, pero poor na po nilang country. Ang Singapore is a rich country, but below siya sa Philippines. Ano ka ha?
Population, sure.
Yes, very good. The factor there is population. Now, the thing here is GDP and GNI, the GDP and GNI is only one of the many indicators for us to know if a country is doing well. Now, if dako kita sa Philippines, dapat dako lang gid pud ato ang production. But then, the problem with the Philippines is that although our production is high, it cannot compensate with the total population of our country. So, mo na ang problem. Dako ta og GDP, dako ta og GNI, pero dako man sad ta og population. So, that is what brings our country to, in poverty. Nasabtan? So, kani si Singapore, gamay ra mga ilang population. Si India, all the more, daghan kaayo tao. Dako ka sila production, grabe kay sila ka hardworking. But the thing there is, daghan pud kaayo tao. Nasabtan? So, that is for GDP. And then GNI, leading US, China, Japan, Germany, India, Japan, France, UK, sila rigid ni sir ang puli-puli. And then for the Philippines, we are on the 30th spot. So okay ta in terms of GNI, mas productive atong citizens than making our territory productive. Nasabtan? Am I clear? Klaro ba? I hope you understood our dili ra info overload. Carry ra. Nasabtan ra. Okay, so tomorrow we will start with a quick discussion lang. Please prepare a calculator or anything that you can use for calculation para dili ta madugay because you will be having a solving tomorrow. And then we will have a worksheet afterwards and then LT on Friday. Okay? So please prepare calculator. Pwede na dili scientific or if you want, mas better scientific, mas paspas magid makasolve. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope you learned something and slides are already uploaded. You can start scrolling, reading in preparation for the LT this coming Friday.